Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week, our guests are former top State Department official and the President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations and author of a critical book at this juncture, War of Necessities, War of Choice. That is Richard Haass. And also Scranton Mayor and Congressional candidate Paige Cognetti. Now remember, we love taking your questions, so write to politicswarroom@gmail.com for next week's show. We're going to get to as many as we can, but don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can also get text updates, what's next for Politicon and Politics War Room by signing up at politicon.com. So tell your friends about us and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And please check out the links to our sponsors, Smalls, Superpower, and DeleteMe in our episode show notes. We thank you for supporting these sponsors because it really helps make this podcast happen. Hey, James, big election day in Illinois this week, deep blue state, where Democratic primaries are critical. The Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton, won the primary to succeed Dick Durbin, who's retired. It was a huge win for Governor J.B. Pritzker as he eyes 2028. I think, I don't know what's going to happen, but if you want to list the 4 or 5 strongest candidates for 2028 on the Democratic side, I think you got to include Pritzker. I will tell you personally, Stratton may be a perfectly good senator. I was disappointed that Congressman Raja Krishnamurti lost. We've had him frequently on our show or a number of times. He would have been a very valuable senator, but that's the way the voters went. I think one other point I'd make is looking at all those Illinois races, the huge financial role that the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee and the pro-cryptocurrency interest played with only mixed results. I hope the media is going to do a more vigorous job on who are these big crypto fat cats, what do they want, and are the people that they contribute to delivering? Because there's all kinds of reasons to be suspicious. And I think AIPAC is playing a dangerous game. They basically equate supporting Netanyahu and his policies with support for Israel. And sometimes there are even suggestions that someone who's not there is engaged in anti-Semitism. That's an outrage. I think Israel is losing support among Americans. Gallup poll said more Americans are sympathetic to the Palestinians than the Israelis. That's a problem. And Bibi Netanyahu may be good for Donald Trump, but he's not good for a lot of Democratic and Republican candidates. And I think that I love Israel. You have done campaigns in Israel, and you can have a strong feeling for that country and its values and consider Bibi Netanyahu a terrible, awful leader. And certainly you're not anti-Semitic if you feel that way.
Well, so a friend of mine, well-known and highly competent political operative, made a point that Israel doesn't try to get people to like them. I mean, when I started politics, the case was it was a beacon of democracy in the Middle East, and Arab independence. It was force. It was Truman. There had to be a Jewish homeland. All of that, of which I agree with. They don't even make any effort to try to reach out to get support. And of course, what's happened is American public turning some. But also look at the split. Jim Gersey down here, the split between over 35 and under 35 Jews.
Right.
All right. I mean, they're not all engaged in a campaign to get you to like them and be sympathetic or get you to support their position. They're just like, we'll just do whatever we want. We don't care whether you like us or not. And that's an unusual place because the story of Israel is a really great, compelling story of Ben Gurion and was playing or Herzl, whatever his name is. I mean, the whole story of the founding and the 67 war and the 73 war, and they're making. I think the government of Israel, and let me be very clear here, if the definition of anti-Semitism that you don't like the government of Israel, and I got to tell you, there's however many, and there's a lot of anti-Semites in Israel, to be frank, that's the definition of it. Of course, that is not the definition of it, but they don't try. They literally don't make an effort to try to. I happen to have great feelings for it because I'm older, but if you're 30, they don't give a shit about you. And I think it's a terrible mistake. And just going in and spending a bunch of money in a Democratic primary for the U.S. Congress, you should spend some money trying to tell Israel's story and why people should support it, other than the fact that you're just going to crush them financially.
Right. No, I definitely agree. I tell you, Richard Haass is terrific on focusing on Iran, but domestically, there is a significant schism on this war that's emerged with the MAGA influencers, the America Firsters, kind of against the America, the great global power. Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro hate each other. Megyn Kelly is attacking her former Fox colleague Sean Hannity, and more important than any of the above, maybe Trump is losing Joe Rogan. This is real. And I don't think that means that MAGA voters are going to flip, but they may stay home. I think it drains the movement of some energy and enthusiasm, which in midterm elections are crucial. So I think that I think this MAGA split is not insignificant.
Yeah. So we've been accustomed to divided Democrats, and whether you're a progressive Democrat, a moderate, or mainstream Democrat, et cetera. But on the big issues, there's more agreement than disagreement. They're very passionate. I mean, when they play, they don't play nice with each other. I mean, they really are vicious when they go after each other. And I can only tell you this from the vantage point of Tucker Carlson, and I generally don't comment on him, but I can say he has never been, to put it mildly, a fan of the state of Israel. And it's, and Mark Levin, and when they go after each other, I mean, they don't go to a knife fight, they go to a nuclear war. And Nick Fuentes and all these crazy alignments they have. I don't know how this ends, but I don't see. I don't think any people are going to back off. And this internal warfare. You hate your brother more than you hate your enemy sometimes, and they're going through that. And Trump sure had any idea how to unify them. It's a mess. It's a real mess, and they really believe this stuff. I mean, it's not something that they can fix overnight.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. James, I'm going to give you some good news on the Democratic side. And that is Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren this week endorsed Mallory McMurrow in the Michigan contested Senate primary. Now, I don't think endorsements matter a great deal. 4 senators have done that now. But McMurrow is, I think, clearly the strongest candidate to keep that seat in Democratic hands. She has momentum. And I think if you consider that race a toss-up beforehand, you'd have to say it at least now leans D.
Yeah, the only one, I mean, if it was Haley Stevens, it wouldn't be much of a leap to be for Haley Stevens. But the third candidate in there is a little more problematical in a general election. Remember, they do have a pretty strong Republican candidate waiting in the wings to run. So it's not that we have a lot, we have some margin, but not so much that we can't be good. And I think her endorsement of Mallory is a positive, and I'm glad to be fighting on the same side with Senator Elizabeth Warren now. And I do hope Mallory wins. Feed your cat the good stuff with Smalls. Wow. I mean, my cat, I just loved it. And the thing is, the cat, it has a good diet. It has a lot to do with the sheen on their coat, everything. And they're in a terribly great mood when they're around humans, but they're great companionship. And that cat was stray, it was straggly, and we fed it. And we got it back up and running, and a great pleasure for a couple of years with that cat. But I got to tell you, the nutrition cat feeds is very much related to how much pleasure you're going to derive from it. In addition to being a humane thing to do, it's also kind of fun when you have a good feisty cat. I love it.
Yeah.
Eat 'em well, and this stuff is really good.
Well, breaking news. In spite of his best efforts, James's cats have no interest in politics, but they have a lot of interest in food. And it can be hard to get their vote, but Smalls wins it every time. As soon as it's poured, cats come running. It's basically competitive eating. Now that James made that switch, they have so much more energy. He may even get them interested in politics before it's all over. Their fur softer, as you noted. They're more luxurious. If you're a cat parent, there's no better time to try Smalls than right now. This podcast is sponsored by Smalls, and if your antidote to the news is cuddling up with your cat, you need to treat them right. Your cats will love how Smalls fresh cat food uses protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free, 100% human-grade ingredients you'd recognize in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. And for a limited time, get 60% off your first order, plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/war room. Now, getting started is easy. Just share the info about your cat's diet, health, and preferences. And Smalls puts together a personalized meal plan for them. So stop wandering the aisles and guessing at the pet store. Smalls has food that satisfies any cat's craving. The results speak for themselves. After switching to Smalls, 88%. Boy, James, you'd love to get 88% in an election. 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvement. That's a really big deal. But don't just take it for us. Forbes ranked Smalls the best overall cat food for a reason. Plus, the team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product, it's risk-free. They will refund you if your cat won't eat their food. So stop guessing which meals will upset their stomach. For a limited time, because you're a Politics War Room listener, get 60% off your first order plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/war room. One last time, that's 60% off your first order plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/war room. The link is in our show note. There are few, if anyone, who better understands the dynamics of wars of choice versus wars of necessity. Richard Haass has written a book on that, a former top State Department official, leading advisor to Secretary of State Colin Powell. He was president of the Council of Foreign Relations for 20 years. Richard, thanks for being with us. We've watched with interest your analysis over the past 3 weeks of the Iranian war and share your reservations. But let's just start with the case that Trump and his supporters make, that they say we with the Israelis have obliterated their nuclear capacity, eliminated Iran's missile program, taken out many of their leaders. The Israelis just killed new ones this week, and the regime is the weakest it has been in years. Isn't that all good?
Up to a point, that is good. The nuclear program was obliterated, though, in June. There's nothing really new that's happened to it. Yes, they've dramatically reduced their ballistic missiles. They've reduced, or the Iranians have shot off a lot of drones. Their navy is much reduced in capacity. So Iran's ability to cause harm is significantly down. A lot of leaders have been killed. But then we get to the other side of the equation, Al. A lot of leaders have been killed. The question is, though, if you ever want to have war termination, with whom do you negotiate? I don't see at the moment that regime change is about to happen in Iran. Iran's ability to prosecute the war continues. We're seeing the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. all the economic consequences for the region, for the world. So the question is, where does this go? Will the United States, the country, the region, and the rest be better off? I would simply say, not obvious, not obvious to me, and I worry, among other things, about a new bout of isolationism here at home if this doesn't end well.
With just cause. It seems to me that Trump is at a crossroads. I mean, really, right now, he can either cite all those military successes, declare victory, and come home and leave them to take care of whatever mess there is there, or he can stay, in his words, to finish the job, try to open the Straits of Hormuz, force regime change. What are the risks of both, and do you have any guess as to what he'll do?
Well, I think you're right that he's caught. The word dilemma tends to be overused, but I actually think he's caught. And in part because he was so unprepared for this war. Uh, he was, I think, thinking that this was going to be quick and easy. Venezuela was what he had in his mind. And
Yeah.
that shows a profound misunderstanding of the political and military reality that is revolutionary Iran. So he was not well served by his staff. We can argue, I wasn't privy to what Bibi Netanyahu, what the Israeli prime minister told him, but the Israeli priorities at the beginning of the war were to go after their missile force. And the idea that dramatically reducing Iran's missile force justified all this is not obvious uh, to me. We talked about some of the costs. Another cost is that we're once again heavily involved in the Middle East. And meanwhile, we're not doing anything to help Ukraine. And Russia's the biggest winner of the war, and China's arguably the second biggest winner of the war. So strategically, this makes no sense. It's even at variance with Trump's own national security strategy. So again, I think he was totally unprepared for what this would do. Finishing the job, I'm not quite sure what that means, because then you get into the question of what's our definition of success? Does that mean regime change? If the job is simply to reduce Iranian capabilities, well, that we've pretty much accomplished. But we still have a regime that we don't like. We still have a closed Strait of Hormuz, and we still have nuclear materials that are in Iran's possession and some that are unaccounted for. So the question, if finishing the job, Al, means taking care of those three things, we could be there for years. We could be
Yeah,
there for years.
and Richard, the only way to guarantee the Straits of Hormuz stay open, I believe, is to send ground forces into Iran, which is a daunting task.
And I'm not sure that would even do it. I'm thinking about other ideas, but I'm unpersuaded that occupying Karg Island or anything like that would make a difference. Convoying vessels makes no sense. I've got some other ideas which I'll put out in the not too distant future, but I haven't heard any good ideas for the Strait. The problem of simply walking away is it leaves all those things in place. So the president has to decide: are we going to negotiate? And the question is, again, to deal with those same issues. If you negotiate, then you implicitly accept the regime. But what is it? Do you reopen the nuclear negotiations that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff arguably mishandled? You try to get the Strait open. What are your positions about Iranian support for proxies or its ballistic missiles or what have you? And what is it you're prepared to do? If you want Iran to stop mining the Strait or stop sending off drones, are you prepared to relieve or economic sanctions? Iran's calling for reparations. I mean, the question is, once you get into a negotiation, the real issue is what are we prepared to pay for what outcome? So I think we've got some really awkward choices, unless somehow the pessimists or the realists, whatever you want to call them, are wrong, and suddenly we get a very different Iranian government in power that's willing to act reasonably towards its own people and towards the region. I don't see a lot of signs of that, Al. That sounds to me like a hope, not a strategy. So I think for Trump, the choices at this point are terrible: to continue an expensive war, expensive in many ways, not just economic, or to try to cut a deal. And then whenever you cut deals, by definition, you compromise.
Richard, I want to circle back to something you said a minute ago. There have been other wars of choice, which you've written about, most in failure. But I don't recall any war where we seem to have been so unprepared or uninformed. I'm not talking about the military. The public was given almost no notice, and then there were shifting rationales. We certainly underestimated the Iranian drone capacity and the ease with which to shut down Hormuz. I watched a little bit of the national security people on Capitol Hill the other day, and it was just a bunch of gobbledygook as to what Trump knew and when he knew it. We underestimated the staying power of the regime. We failed to notify allies, and now Trump is furious that allies won't work with us. And for all the brilliance of the military operation, the political planning was catastrophic. I'm picking up on what you said. Do you attribute that to a second-rate corps of advisors and planners, or just an impulsive and ill-informed president?
I see Mr. Carville may have joined us. The answer is, look, I don't disagree with anything you said. I can't think of a parallel to this, where the United States designed a policy and then implemented with so little process, with so little serious thinking. My guess is, your two leading negotiators, or if you will, outside the system, Mr. Witkoff and Kushner. You don't really have a National Security Council anymore. It's been hollowed out. Intelligence is often pushed to the side. This is the most top-down administration. Let's be blunt, in American history, and you either don't have the experts to call on anymore. Again, the NSC isn't really there. State Department's lost a big percentage of its experience and talent, or you simply ignore them. And you've got a president who has near unlimited confidence. And I think that's where Venezuela comes in. My sense is that Venezuela provided what the president thought was an enormous tailwind, that he could do a similar thing. And I can't prove it, but let me posit the possibility. When he started putting all those forces in the region, and this is before the war started, so we're talking in January, his so-called Armada, and he started issuing those threats to the Iranian regime. If you do anything to the people of Iran, you're going to be sorry, and so forth. I think the president thought after Venezuela that would do the trick. And all that, to me, reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of Iran, and particularly revolutionary Iran, since '79. And I think he's been, if you will, trapped ever since then. And there's a tremendous disconnect between what he wants to accomplish, what he's been pressed to accomplish, and what we can accomplish. And that's why he's still stuck. Going back to your question, what does he do now? I don't think he has terribly good options at this point.
Yeah, I don't either. James Carville.
So, Haass, I don't exactly know what the law is, but if you work for the State Department and you're negotiating with Iran or Saudi Arabia or Russia or anywhere else, you have certain conflicts. You can't enter a backdoor business deal with the sheik, or you can't sign a contract with Gazprom or whatever the Russian energy company is called. Yet it looks like Kushner and Witkoff have the status of diplomats, but don't have any of the burdens of do's and don'ts and part of government ethics or regulations. How does that work? Can anybody just keep doing this?
It would appear so. I mean, it helps when you have a Justice Department that, shall we say, looks the other way. It helps when you have an administration that almost is unfamiliar with the concept of norms. And I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you what is explicitly prohibited and what isn't. But one of the ways our society and democracy works is we don't depend only on the letter of the law. There's the old-fashioned notion of spirit of the law and norms, conflicts of interest. I worked for 4 presidents. It was kind of like going to visit your doctor for your annual exam when you have to get confirmed by the Senate or past the White House lawyers. It's not a pleasant process, but you go through it. And whether it's this, I remember all the stocks, not that I'm wealthy, but all the stocks you have to sell and so forth. And the idea that family members or these individuals themselves can continue to do business dealings. It's almost like, well, from 2 to 4, I'm going to try to negotiate a deal on Ukraine, and from 6 to 8, we're gonna do Iran. But between 4 and 6, we're going to deal with sovereign wealth funds and make money. The idea that, again, I don't know what's technically permissible, but the idea that you'd create a culture where this could happen just seems to me fundamentally wrong. But I would also say they're getting away with it, which says a little bit about us. At some point, we get the government we deserve rather than the government we want or need.
So, if Al's already asked you this, but Simon just get it out. But what I hear commentators say is Russia is the big winner of all of this. Or is that a? Do you agree with that assessment that Russia's hand's been strengthened as a result of this excursion, as Trump would call it?
100%. Yeah, I write a Substack called Home and Away, and I'm actually preparing a future one. It might be late this week, or I might do it next week, on the winners and losers. And the biggest winner is Russia. And you think about it, the fact that oil prices have gone from 60 to the zip code of 100. So Russia's making almost twice the money they were making. Then we go ahead and relieve sanctions. We make it easier for Russia to sell the oil. So they're selling it at a higher price and they're selling more of it. Then we're using up all this equipment that ought to be going to Ukraine. Plus, we're distracted by this. Plus, it's created new frictions or fissures between the United States and Europe. So I would think Vladimir Putin is taking out the vodka. I think he's gotta love what's going on. I don't know about you, James. I haven't heard anybody really talk much about Ukraine now. It's almost we've only got all the focus is on here. Here we are in the 5th year of this phase of the war with Russia and Ukraine. Diplomacy is essentially dead in the water because the Russians keep stiff arming it. The other country that's probably pretty happy is China for similar reasons. That we're distracted, we're using up all this equipment. It's not to Taiwan's benefit. Our Asian allies are paying an enormous price economically. They're so dependent on Middle Eastern energy and particularly gas. Again, we're distracted by the region. We used to talk about the pivot to Asia. Now we seem to have a pivot from Asia, and we're back in the Middle East after Trump's own national security strategy say one of the big mistakes of American foreign policy is we've been too involved in the Middle East. But I think Russia and China have been the big strategic beneficiaries of this.
But I'll ask you the question. It's impossible to answer, but take a stab at it. How does all wars that start end one way or the other, they're spun around or they just last, and they have the 100 Years' War and the 7 Years' War and the Flavel Wars and the Cold War. This thing's got to end someday. How does it end?
I don't have any. I think there's a question of when it ends. There's the duration question. There's the question of what is the trajectory of this war? To what extent does it get more intense? Does it spread while it's still going on? And then the third question, as you say, is how does it end? And it can end with everything from at the one end would be a formal negotiation between a U.S. and an Iran that kind of looks like the current one. You could have regime change in Iran and a new government there at the other end of the spectrum that would sign a very positive kind of agreement, deal with all of our issues of mutual concern. You could have an Iran that breaks up in many ways amongst its various ethnic groups, in which case, under various scenarios, I can see this not so much end as grinding down. If you think about it, so instead of the battleship Missouri, or instead of Appomattox, you're a historian, you have something that's simply grinds down. And the problem with that is it doesn't give you an answer to the future of Iran's nuclear thing. I don't know if the Strait of Hormuz opens that way. I mean, when the Israelis talk about that scenario, the awful phrase is the idea of mowing the lawn, and that you don't have a resolution. You just go back and deal with it every so often. It's in many ways the analogy or the model is the war on terror. You don't have an end to the war on terror. What you have are periodic efforts to reduce what's out there, to set it back. So one possibility for the war in Iran is it doesn't quote unquote end in any formal traditional sense, but we simply have to revisit it from time to time. And I think that might be a model that the Israelis could live with until one day that maybe a leadership more willing to cut a formal deal emerges.
I just remind you, and I know it's a movie, but it's probably somewhat accurate. In the movie, Gandhi is sitting at the table, and a British colonial administrator says, "You don't expect that we're just going to walk out of here now, do you?" And Gandhi said, "Yes, that's exactly what you're going to do. You're just going to walk out of here." And you know what they did? They just walked out of there. And for the life of me, that's one way to end it.
Well, that's one way for the United States to end its direct participation at this stage.
Right.
But what are the terms? But if Iran then is free to out from under to do what it wants with its nuclear things or to support proxies, that's nothing more than a pause. And then I think we face all sorts of problems down the road. So we can, it's a cliche. It only takes one to start a war, and in this case, the United States was the one. It's going to take three to end this. And to me, the much more complicated party here is Iran, and whether there is a leader or leadership emerges that can end the war if they want to. And then the question is, what would it take them to? And then whether the United States and Iran can agree. And I just think we're a long way away from that. And the problem is, the longer this goes on, I don't see how we benefit.
Trump has said he doesn't need alliances. We're the most powerful country in the world. Yep. Then he asks others to help us. They stiff him, and he gets furious at them. But, there's a larger question here. He doesn't really care or appreciate the necessity of alliances. That has long-term consequences, doesn't it?
Well, 100%. It used to be that, I admit I'm a member of the foreign policy establishment. When you're president of the Council on Foreign Relations for 20 years, you're a paid-up member of the establishment. But one of the advantages is that as Americans, we'd wake up every day and we had all these allies. I remember I once described them when I was working for President Bush the father as a pool of partners. And every day we had this pool of partners we could potentially draw on, whether it was to deal with challenges in Europe or Asia or global challenges or whatever. And neither Russia nor China had them. So it was the great structural advantage of American foreign policy. I used to describe it as a strategic force multiplier. Donald Trump, though, sees allies negatively for a couple of reasons. One is he sees them as freeloaders. And fair enough, at times they haven't done enough. I wouldn't call them freeloaders, but they haven't on occasion, they haven't done enough in terms of defense. Economically, he sees them as adversaries or competitors in his preoccupation with America's trade balances. And I think temperamentally, he doesn't like them because alliances tie your hands. Alliances build in obligations, and then you've got to do things. And he doesn't like structured obligations because he likes, shall we say, unlimited improvisation. And it's interesting. When you look at this administration, you go back to J.D. Vance a year ago when he went to Munich, you look at the national security strategy, the hostility towards Europe. It's almost like I was thinking about it the other day. It's like they see Europe as a giant Ivy League university filled with woke values and caring about climate change and pacifists and all that.
Right.
And the contempt for Europe is really, really quite profound.
Well, he also said this week that, I wanted to test NATO because I don't think they'll ever come to our aid when we need them, and they never have. He apparently forgot or didn't know about 9/11.
Yeah, the only time Article 5's ever been triggered was 9/11.
And they delivered.
And Afghanistan. Look at the amount of the European sacrifice there. No, it's either not knowing or just either out of ignorance or just willfully dismissing this history is just so insulting. And it's also, again, I think it's going to be hard to recreate. I mean, or restore. If after, I don't know who's the next president. It's James's department, and I'm not smart enough. My crystal ball is in the warehouse. But even if the United States once again had a president, say, who had Biden's inclinations and wanted to put alliances at the center of American foreign policy, good luck in trying to resurrect that completely. I think every national security advisor around the world now has a hedging strategy against the United States because we can't be predicted or trusted to be there. One of the consequences of this, I realize, has taken us a bit afar. I think potentially we're looking at a world of far more nuclear weapons and far more hands, because I think we're looking at a world where, as alliances weaken, the president seems not to understand that the principal bulwark against the proliferation of nuclear weapons, it's not the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it's America's alliances. Right. All these countries, South Korea, Japan, the countries of Europe, didn't need nuclear weapons because we had them and they could depend on us and they could trust us. When that trust goes away, and it's going away fast, and they still face threats in North Korea or China or Russia, I think they're going to take matters into their own hand. That is not a better future.
I went to a small dinner party about 3 or 4 years ago during the Biden administration with 3 ambassadors from important countries. And as the conversation ensued, they all said the biggest question we get, from the home office is, has America gone back to what it was? Was there just a temporary aberration, or could it go back? And I don't think they'll have those discussions in 2029. It's hard to argue that America just had this 8-year aberration.
No, I think the re-election of Donald Trump for many in Europe and Asia was the stunning moment. 2016, the feeling was, okay, it happened. When 2024 happened, in the sense that America decided to re-elect Donald Trump, I think pretty much knowing what they were going to get, even though I'd hasten to add Trump 2.0 is fundamentally different in some ways than Trump 1.0. For a lot of people around the world, a lot of the foreign ministers and types I deal with said, wow, this is really about you, America, more than about this individual. And so, in the future, it suggests to me, and that's where, again, this war figures in. I don't know exactly what the long-term implications or repercussions of this war could be, but we are a different country. And again, this is not my department. You two are the domestic political experts. But with populism where it is, with AI and long-term joblessness presumably getting worse, if this turns out to be a bad foreign war after Iraq and Afghanistan, I just think it can be very hard to regenerate, if that's the word, a kind of serious foreign policy consensus in this country.
So let me ask one more and then turn it back to James to close this guy. James, I have one more question. What role are the Saudis and MBS playing in this, Richard?
Well, originally, I got the sense that they weren't too excited about this war. Saudi Arabia has a kind of détente with Iran. They didn't much like them, but they prize stability. What the Saudis want more than anything before this war started was to get on with life, to focus on the economy. A lot of talk about a post-energy economy. The Crown Prince was introducing certain limited reforms to make young people think that living in Saudi Arabia was getting better and wasn't boring. Then this war happened, and I think now the Saudis have basically said, well, whether we want it or not, we've got it. And now they're worried about a long-term threat from Iran. So my sense is now they somehow want this quote-unquote solved. And one of the problems with foreign policy is things rarely get solved. Things tend to get kicked down the road. But I think the Saudis at the moment are probably on the side of one way or another. We don't want to live with a totally radicalized, alienated Iran. What I'm not sure, Val, is what point along the crisis the Saudis switched from arguing against for arguing for. And that clearly happened at one point. And where the Saudi line became more, shall we say, let's go for it. And again, I think if so, then they too underestimated how this would play out, because they pay a price for this. And even though so far their facilities have been largely, though not, I believe, entirely off limits, I don't think anybody can assume that Iran won't lash out and attack either energy-related gas and oil facilities or even desalination plants. And a country like Saudi Arabia is stunningly vulnerable when it comes to sufficient drinking water.
James?
So Richard, you spend most of your time in foreign policy and talking to other diplomats and foreign policy experts, academics. I spend most of my time talking about point spreads and predicted and what are the odds as a Democrat take the Senate. Ask any of your friends.
Your life sounds like a lot more fun than mine.
Right. I would book an even money bet for anybody that will never be able to prove it, that if you gave Trump in a globe and you said, point to the Straits of Hormuz, he couldn't do it. He wouldn't know where the shit it is. I really believe that. Now, we'll never be able to play it out, but I put the odds at no better than 50-50. He don't know where it is or even thought about it. He knows.
I think this administration, in many cases, it's unencumbered by expertise or historical memory. No, and that's look, that's dangerous. I think that's where, by the way, James, that's where the lack of process is so dangerous. The idea that you'd have a president who didn't know where something was on a map or didn't have the history, okay. Not every president, when it comes to foreign policy, is 41, H.W. Bush, who loved this stuff. But that's why you need staff, and that's why you need process. And in a funny sort of way, you need all that to compensate for the president's weaknesses. But this is administration, rather than compensating, if anything, they play into them, because I don't get a sense that anybody challenges anything. So this is the result. This is again, it's I think it's the first. It's funny. I'll make a political point. Let me answer your lane again. Normally, presidents turn to foreign policy often late in their second terms when they get frustrated with domestic policy, because the goddamn Congress won't let them do stuff. And foreign policy is kind of a more malleable world for them to operate in. And we've seen that time and time again. What's so odd here is Trump has turned to foreign policy, even though he pretty much controls things domestically because of the Republicans in Congress. And what he's come up against is an adversary that's actually really difficult for him to control, called Iran. And I just don't think he bargained for this. I literally think we went into this war. It violates my first rule of wars: never start a war against a country you don't understand. And we did it in 2003 against Iraq, and we've done it in 2026 with Iran.
Well, you always have an expression. Paige has somebody in there that knows a little something, and you happen to know a little something, and that's a great gift. But the idea that he couldn't point to the Straits of Hormuz, none of your foreign policy experts is that guy's out of his mind. He may not be right, but that's not an impossible hypothesis that he couldn't point to it on a map.
James, I'll tell you what else this reminds me of. Over 40 years ago, as the Wall Street Journal, my alma mater, was expanding its international coverage, a young journalist asked, "Is our style Iran or Iraq?" I think that probably was something that Trump at some point must have asked. Anyway, Richard Haass, you've been a terrific guest. We've learned a lot from you, and you might be the establishment, but you're a good thinking and a terrific guest establishment figure. So thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
What does the Midwest and the Middle East have in common? A bunch of places that start with I.
Hey, get your health right with Superpower.
It's critical, and you don't have to go through the rigmarole of filling everything out. They come right to your house. And the stuff that they give you is actually more comprehensive than what you can get from your internist. And when you look at those values, they're critical to your well-being and your longevity. It's an unbelievable product that they're able to do this, and they're able to do it as conveniently and as thoroughly as they do it.
Yeah. Nobody wants to see a doctor and leave more confused than ever. As men of actions, it drives anyone crazy if there's no data or game plan. Enter Superpower. It's one simple blood draw with over 100 biomarkers, way more than what you usually get, and it unlocks a real understanding of your body for the years ahead. We were amazed at how much you can find out. Their app includes detailed information about your heart, liver, thyroid, hormones, metabolism, vitamin and mineral levels, and environmental toxins. That means you get insight on everything from disease prevention to brain fog or optimizing your workouts. Hands down, it's the most comprehensive and advanced system out there. Even with a busy schedule, Superpower makes it easy. They can send a licensed professional to your home, or you can visit a nearby lab. After going, you have answers to questions like, is my diet healthy? Are these changes working? And more. Now that we can get their actionable health plans based on results, we have nutritional guidance, lifestyle and behavioral adjustments, and supplement or prescription suggestions buyable directly from Superpower. You even get your true biological age, if you want it, that you can track over time. Let's just say James and I enjoy hearing about how youthful we are. It's not a one-time snapshot. Each test builds on the last, so you can see progress year by year. Plus, their on-demand clinician team answers questions so you know exactly what everything means. So don't wait. Stop reacting and start proactively improving your health based on personalized data. And we have some good news. Superpower's high-end concierge level care is just $199. That's $179 with our discount. Other testing services cost a lot more for similar or less. So know your numbers and make this the year you stop guessing about your health with Superpower. Not only does Superpower reduce their price to just $199, but as I said, for a limited time, our listeners can get an additional $20 off with the code WARROOM. Head to superpower.com and use code WARROOM at checkout for $20 off your membership. And after you sign up, they'll ask you how you heard about them. So make sure to mention this podcast to support the show. The link is in our show notes. Hey, James, we promised that we'd regularly talk to challengers in this critical election. Today, we have Scranton Mayor Paige Cognetti in one of the most closely watched and contested races in the country, Pennsylvania's 8th congressional district, running against incumbent Republican Rob Bresnahan. Mayor Cognetti is used to running against the establishment. She was first elected mayor in 2019, running against a corrupt Democratic machine. Thank you so much for being with us, Madam Mayor. And I would tell our viewers, Michelle Cottle has a terrific piece on you in the New York Times. And I want to say defensively that we invited you on even before that piece ran.
Sure.
But everybody ought to read that piece. It's not easy to beat an incumbent in a district that Trump carried 3 times. Both the Cook Political Report and Inside Elections still rate the race as lean Republican. Why are they wrong?
I first ran for mayor of Scranton 7 years ago as an independent. Our local Democratic machine here was alive and strong even after the Scranton mayor went to federal prison for extortion. And you'd think at that point that the local party would think that maybe some change was needed, but no, they went behind a closed door, picked a candidate, and said, basically, here's your mayor. I had different ideas. I switched to independent. We had 7 people in that race. I won the race with 37% of the vote. We vowed to do things differently. Folks called our race Paige Against the Machine, which was hilarious and continues to be this informal thing that people call our campaign. We're running on corruption. We call out corruption wherever we see it. We unfortunately had it here in Scranton. We've spent these years pushing it out of city government. We've rebuilt trust in government here in Scranton. And unfortunately, in Rob Bresnahan, this new congressman, we have seen from the jump that he ran on banning stock trading. He's become one of the most active traders in Congress. He even, we unearthed audio last week. We heard that he said he does talk to his financial advisor about his stock positions. He has claimed up and down these last, I don't do that. I don't do that. Well, he was on the radio last year saying that he does that. He says one thing, does another. We can trace his votes and his trades. He sold $130,000 of Medicaid provider stock a week before he voted for H.R. 1 and slashed $1 trillion from Medicaid. This is the kind of stuff people are so tired of. That's how we are going to win this race, is go my record against his. We have turned Scranton around. We have gotten our credit rating from no rating to A-. We have a government that works for people. We are there to serve. And that is the stark opposite of Rob Bresnahan.
We're going to talk about your opponent in just a moment. First, your district is, it leans a little red, but it's a purple district. How do voters in the 8th feel about Trump's Iran war?
No, it's really interesting. Folks here feel left behind, right? They voted for Donald Trump for 3 times. They also voted for Governor Josh Shapiro in 2022. Governor Shapiro is on the ballot again. This is a true swing district. People really do think for themselves, and they really bristle when people try to tell them what to think. I think what we have here is a situation where I spend more time talking to my city council about the status of a water project in a neighborhood than President Trump has spent with the American people telling him why we are going to a war with Iran. People want clarity. They are smart. They just need information. You talk to military families who are terrified of their children being over there. We need information. We need to understand. The American people will be behind our troops. Of course, we are always there. This president, though, is not giving us what we need. He is not giving us the clarity that we need. We don't know what the goals are, and that's a huge concern here.
So you're running against Trump's war as of now?
I want a president and a Congress who do their jobs. Donald Trump has skirted Congress for the last, 14 months. Congress has abdicated their responsibility. People like Rob Bresnahan have allowed Donald Trump to do whatever he wants. Bresnahan is not doing his job. He is not representing the people of northeastern Pennsylvania. They are just letting this president do whatever he wants, it seems. So there's no accountability in Congress.
I certainly agree with you on that. But if a vote came up today for or against authorizing the war in Iran, how would you vote?
We don't have any information. That's the problem, right? It's kind of a false.
No, but that's what happens in Congress when it comes up.
Yeah, we're being asked to do something after the fact is so hard. We're there. I understand that all the troops are there and our assets are there. We need to keep going. And I had the intel that we need to keep going. I could support that. But I don't support this lack of understanding, this lack of information, and the goal shifting is really disturbing, and it's not fair to our troops. It's not fair to our military families. It's not fair to the American people.
Do you think that the huge spike in gasoline prices is affecting voters as one would think it would?
Oh yeah, costs are always an issue, everywhere in America, of course, but definitely northeastern Pennsylvania. People are irate for years now about our utility bills, our water bills, and now you have these gas prices going up. Gas prices are going up right before the Easter holiday and people traveling for Mother's Day and graduations. It's going to have a real impact on folks.
Right. I said we'd talk about your opponent. I read stuff he put out this week. He says he favors tax cuts for the working class, that he wants to weed out Medicaid fraud so all deserving recipients will be okay. He notes he was one of the few House Republicans to support extending the Obamacare tax subsidies, and he supports Trump taking out the terrorist Iranian regime. That sounds kind of like a moderate Republican.
Oh, no, he is not going to fool the people of northeastern Pennsylvania. He got that hall pass to do the ACA subsidy discharge petition. He knew, and they all knew, was going to go nowhere. He is trying desperately to backtrack on the healthcare cuts he has made. We already had hospitals on the brink of closure here in northeastern Pennsylvania before H.R. 1, and he is trying to kind of be the one to set the fire and then come over with a bucket of water and be called the hero. He's trying very hard to paper over that, but you can't do that. The way that they're doing these cuts is absurd. And that if they think that the Medicaid cuts are only going to happen and be felt in 2027, they are very wrong. It is already being felt. I talk to people whose children with special needs no longer have Medicaid. People at Meals on Wheels, they already have their Medicaid subsidy cut, and there are fewer seniors that they can feed. So these Medicaid cuts are already impacting folks, and the hospitals themselves. Their projections just got worse last June, and it's just going to get harder and harder for folks to be able to have the healthcare access that they need in northeastern Pennsylvania.
Oh, all right.
James.
So, Mayor, first I want to clear the air here. Are you the mayor of Scranton, or as Tommy Brower would say, Scranton? Do you pronounce the
Depends on the person.
So you didn't just fall off the turnip truck. Tell us how you grew up and how did you end up being mayor of Scranton? Just give our listeners a little bit of who you are.
Sure. So back in 2003, I was in Japan teaching English. And when President Bush went to war in Iraq, I stood in a teacher's lounge with 60 Japanese people looking at me, the American, saying, "Why are we doing this?" And at that moment, instead of going in and trying to become an English literature professor, which I thought I was going to do, I started to think, maybe I'd like to move out to Washington and get involved in government and politics and maybe try to chart a course that I agreed with more. So I ended up moving out to DC, coming up to Northeastern Pennsylvania for a campaign. I was on Chris Carney's race in 2006, and I had the fortune of stopping by a local market. I was very hungry for something that wasn't pizza and met my husband. And here we are 20 years later. We have these two beautiful girls. He still has that store. I was there this morning. And the political career was not something that I planned at all. But when I moved here permanently, I started reading about the corruption and the machine politics. And I wasn't going to raise a family in a place where that was okay.
So, but where did you grow up?
Oregon. I'm from Oregon.
So you're a Scranton Mayor choice. Oh, yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing. Right? We choose to live here. My husband is from here. Our little girls know nothing else. I had my first daughter 2 weeks before I became mayor, and our kids know me as mom and mayor, and I only know motherhood as being mayor simultaneously. So it's just our whole life, and it's really, really fun. And it gives me a very good perspective on being mayor, being a mom of little kids.
So Democrats struggle to get working class, I'm just using the term, I can't define it, but we kind of know what it is, working class whites, particularly working class white males. What are you doing to overcome that obstacle? How are you communicating with the guys in the union shop or the St. Patrick's Day parade, whatever we run there? And I know Lackawanna County well, and there's a lot of working class white males there.
Yeah, I mean, we have been fighting for people at the city, and we've been making government work. We have professionalized our code enforcement department, for example. It was a job where you just drove your own car around, and maybe you had a lanyard, that was it. You're supposed to go give people quality of life tickets. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now we have, you have your car, you have all your gear. It's a certified position. It's a career now, not a job, right? It's showing people respect for what they do and fostering that environment for them to have a career track, for them to have a retirement, for them to actually be able to provide for their families. And we show that in a lot of different ways. Right now, we show up for these public utility commission hearings. I feel like I'm going to one every single week because these utility companies keep asking for rate hikes on us. And we know what their profit margins are. It's horrendous that they want to do that on our backs. It's these data center meetings. We're going into these auditoriums throughout Lackawanna County where so many data centers are proposed. It is people of every political stripe, every income level who don't want to see their communities ruined by these. It's fighting for people. It's showing up and showing that you care. Talking points can only go so far, and we're very proud of our record here in Scranton.
So in politics, you always have to have groups of threes. Don't ask me why, but you do. So when I look at you, I see cost of living, corruption, and what's number three?
Just making stuff work. It really, I know it's boring, but the governor does his get shit done thing, and that's very similar to what we do. It's just like government should work for you. Okay. When you call us, we're going to respond. It doesn't matter who you are. You don't have to know somebody. It needs to work. We need to be excellent at what we do. You'd be excellent at being good stewards of your tax dollars. So getting to Congress would be the same thing. The Doge cuts are ridiculous. Taking a chainsaw like this has been insane. I always talk about it. We've been doing it with a red pen and high heels instead of a chainsaw and weird t-shirts. We need reform. We absolutely need reform, but you can't cut things off and then try to scramble later. You got to do it smart. Yes, it takes time, but we have to do these things. We have to do these things well. So it's really making sure that
I just came out of the blue, 1, 2, and 3. And yeah, I'm a big believer that the ability. Suppose that somebody is listening to this and they really kind of like you and they want to send you a check. How could they do that? Are you accepting campaign donations?
Yes, paigeforpa.com. We are a really fun campaign. I think, having started 20 years ago on a campaign in Northeastern Pennsylvania in a red to blue and a flip opportunity, I'm a campaign kid at heart. And so I love this stuff. I love going around and meeting people and being a part of something that's far greater than myself. And it's a lot of fun. So it's paigeforpa.com. We have no primary. That's very important. There's no primary opponent on the ballot. So it truly is us taking on this incumbent who has shown himself to be about himself and his stock portfolio and not about serving the people of Northeastern PA.
Bravo. I'll turn it back to you, but before I do, I encourage everybody to, throw a shekel or two in the pot. I think this candidate is going to win this race and turn this district around and turn America around too. Thank you. Go ahead, Al.
Let's go back and talk about your opponent. As you say, he's a big stock trader. He, of course, says it was just my financial advisor. You can address that. And also, would you prohibit any stock trading for members of Congress and apply it to the executive branch also?
For Congress, I don't see a reason why anybody needs to trade individual stocks. This is not at all about begrudging folks making money in the stock market or their wealth at all. But if you are choosing to serve in the United States Congress, that's a choice. I don't see a reason why you need to trade individual stocks. We have such a deficit of trust in institutions, especially the U.S. Congress. The least we can do is try to build it back with something like a stock trading ban, something with no budget, no pay, right? These are small things that we can do. Everybody running for Congress has made a choice. We have made a commitment. That commitment should mean something. We have to build back trust with the people. Some of these things are very important to paving that road.
Well, you used to work in the Treasury, so shouldn't it be applied to the executive branch also?
I think that it should. I'd be interested to see if Congress would be able to do that, but I certainly would advocate for that. Again, you're making a choice, and it's public service. You can go back to trading stocks when you're no longer in that position, but I just don't see a reason for that.
Let me give you a chance to answer the Bresnahan counter. He charges that you have a conflict in getting aid for Fidelity Bank, where your uncle-in-law is on the board. Let me just give you a chance to answer that.
What they're talking about is a state grant. It's not a city grant. Every single decision that I have made as mayor has been for the betterment of this city. And the Fidelity Bank is investing tens of millions of dollars to rehab the Electric City building. It is an iconic building that, if they were not doing this work, would probably be sitting empty. It would be an eyesore, not only for our economy and a lack of opportunity there, but it's the Electric City building. Our logo is based on the sign that sits on that building. It's also a huge piece of our morale and our momentum in the city. Everything we do in the city is for the people. When I came in on the heels of the mayor going to prison, I said no to the city car. I said no to the city gas card. I buy my own stamps. I buy my own sympathy cards. I gave 5% of my salary back during COVID. There was a raise for the mayor's seat that started in January. I'm not taking that raise. I believe that you have to show that public service is for the people. I've done that in Scranton, and that's why I am so passionate about advocating for that in the Congress.
James talks about your background, born in Oregon, and then teaching in Japan when the war broke out in 2003. You also later were at Goldman Sachs, and you were in the Obama Treasury Department. Has that given you certain advantages in preparation for Congress?
Of course. At the Treasury Department, I had an incredible opportunity to be a junior staffer with these policymakers that were fighting the financial crisis. And then just months later, it became the Euro crisis. I was staffing the Undersecretary for International Affairs and got to see those policymakers across the entire world try to fight that. It was an incredible opportunity to see what happens when people are thoughtful and smart and doing things in a way that is never perfect. No things are, but you always have to have a plan. You always have to have a theory of the case. You have to communicate that, and you have to go. What we see now is a complete lack of that. You see a lack of expertise. You see people actually, saying that expertise is bad. We're seeing universities be bludgeoned by this administration. It's okay to have process. It's okay to be thoughtful. It's okay to have allies. It's okay to maintain diplomatic relations. We have a lot of work to do, and I was fortunate to be able to see things at that level at a young age.
Scranton is a city that's rich with political history. Former Governor Bill Scranton, the late Bill Scranton, was in there. The Caseys, Joe Biden, but the city fell on hard times. And is it really? And I know you are turning it around, but can Scranton really be turned into a sort of destination city of sorts between New York and Philadelphia?
It absolutely can. We have a really cool art scene, food scene, music scene. The architecture here, which James can tell you from his time here, is absolutely gorgeous and has been really well preserved. We have cool neighborhoods. We're in the middle of a valley that is beautiful. You can ski 10 minutes away. You can, go up to the lake and do all these different things. But also New York City is 2.5 hours away. So it really is a place where you can live less expensively than you can in the bordering states. You can have a great quality of life. And we're seeing that. We're seeing people come here. We're seeing that growth. We need to make sure with that growth, though, we get the right jobs. We need to build more housing, all the things that all of us mayors deal with. We need to make sure that we have a high quality of life and an affordable cost of living. And it's been really fun to be mayor these years because we're seeing the fruits of that. We also need to get this train during the Biden administration with that bipartisan infrastructure law. We are supposed to get a train line from Scranton to New York City that we had until 1970. We're one of the top 5 projects that's supposed to go online. Nothing seems to be happening. That's another reason I want to get to Congress and make sure that we do everything we can to get that train line built. It'll open up our whole economy.
Madam Mayor, it's been terrific having you on. It is going to be one of the great races to watch over the next 7 months or so. I'm going to. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I mean, Carville's taking all the credit for it, and I've been to Scranton a number of times, and I want to go back and look at some of the. I'll do that. Okay, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Keep yourself safe online with DeleteMe. In the social media age, it's really important to protect your personal data from being shared online. DeleteMe makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. It's worse than you think. Data brokers make a profit off your data by commoditizing everything you do online. Now, anyone on the web can buy your private details like your social security number, address, contact info, family connections, and more. This can lead to identity theft, phishing attempts, and harassment. But now you can protect you and your family's privacy with DeleteMe. Even if you think you have nothing to hide, if you don't take the digital dangers lurking out there seriously, you can put you and your family at risk. As public figures, we always knew we could be targets for scammers and worse. When we found out how many Americans are compromised and at the mercy of criminals, you just want to fight back. With DeleteMe, you'll feel so much better about your security. But more importantly, as family men, absolutely. DeleteMe is something that can help keep our loved ones safe. So join us and start taking steps to protect your privacy with DeleteMe. New York Times Wirecutter named DeleteMe their top pick for data removal services for a reason. So don't wait. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for DeleteMe. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your DeleteMe plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/warroom and use the promo code warroom at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/warroom and enter the code warroom at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/warroom, code warroom. The link also is in our show notes. Now for my outrage of the week. Every president in wartime is unhappy with press coverage. Sometimes it's justified. When the Chicago Tribune revealed, as the Battle of Midway was ending in 1942, that we had broken the Japanese code, FDR wanted to indict them. Wiser heads prevailed. President Kennedy, in 1963, wanted the New York Times to replace David Halberstam over his critical coverage of the Vietnam conflict. The Times refused. Kennedy and his successors should have listened to Halberstam. Of course, Donald Trump takes it a step further and says that some reporters should be tried for treason. They're not praising him enough for his war in Iran. Loyal lapdogs like Pete Hegseth and FCC Chair Brendan Carr predictably echo their boss's charges. Also chiming in were 2 former Democrats, now has-beens, ex-New York City Councilman Andrew Stein and Mark Penn, who correctly identified himself as a former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton. he neglected to mention he was forced out of Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign because of a conflict of interest. Anyway, Penn signed charge that an anti-Trump press has lied about the Iranian war with headlines like, quote, "War sends more remorse to a shaken world economy," end quote. That's wrong. That's wrong. Have they looked at markets lately? Anyone carefully or even casually following the Iran coverage knows that A, the United States and Israeli militaries have brilliantly devastated Iranians' missile inventory, harmed their enrichment plans, and while killing their top leaders. Well-informed readers also would know about the turmoil in energy markets, the spike in gas prices, the surprise at how effectively Iran shut down the Straits of Hormuz. Maybe James and I will send Messrs. Penn and Stein subscriptions to the New York Times and Wall Street Journal so they can learn about all this. All right, now for the questions from our terrific listeners. Jim, Dr. Jim, in Charleston, South Carolina, says, can we start seriously talking about Democratic leadership and the pathetic job that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have done to stand up for what is right? I know they're in the minority, but we never hear from them. Jim, I just disagree with you. They are in the minority. What can you do if you're in the minority if the majority never wants to have cooperation? They've kept their caucuses together. The one thing I do, you say we never hear from him. I think, frankly, we hear a little bit too much from Chuck Schumer. I've said this before. I think he's a very good inside the caucus, indoor politician. He ought to let other people, the Alyssa Lockins of the world, be the outdoor face of the Senate Democrats. But I think Jeffries and Schumer are doing a pretty good job as minority leaders, which is never an easy task. Jacqueline in New Mexico. Now, Jacqueline, this is a great question, so I'm going to ask you, but next time tell us where in New Mexico you're from. The land of enchantment is a great state. And she wants to know, do you think the era of truly great senators like Margaret Chase Smith, John McCain, Ted Kennedy is behind us? Now senators focus on cable news clips and social media sound bites rather than becoming the kind of institutional figures who define earlier eras. First of all, Jacqueline, it always seems they were better in the past. And I think the system was better in the past, despite there were some bad things about it. Don't forget, that was a system where for many, many years operated under segregation. And I think there are people who are just as capable as the McCains or the Kennedys in the Senate today. But I think the system, there's a reward for doing quick sound bites and cable news clips. And some of that's cable news' fault, but giving thoughtful speeches is not often rewarded by the political media these days. So I don't think they're lesser figures. I just think it's a lesser time. Hey, Nate in Leavenworth, Kansas. Nate, I hope you're outside the facility there rather than inside. Nate says, given that they are blocking intelligence warnings from local law enforcement about possible domestic attack risk from Iran, do you think the administration wants a terrorist attack so they can blame it on the Homeland Security shutdown and Democrats? Oh, Nate, how could you think that about this group? Trying to do a policy which, in fact, would work to their political advantage, even if it hurts a lot of people. I don't think one could possibly rule that out. All right, remember, we love those questions. Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. As always, send your questions for us by email to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Following this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you check out the links to our sponsors, Smalls, Superpower, and DeleteMe in our episode show note. We thank you for supporting them because when you do, you help make this podcast happen. Now, to keep up with us, subscribe to Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and check out our Substack at politicswarroom.com. James and I are constantly adding new content, so go take a look. You can also find other shows you might enjoy on the Politicon YouTube channel or when you search Politicon on your favorite podcast sites. Now remember, please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show as we continue our War Room planning.